Great. Well, welcome everybody. Just to kind of respect your time, we'll kind of get off and going. And so during this time, kind of my goals for today is really to kind of go over this new standard, which is standard 1.1. It's actually been updated, I should say, as of I think officially it was November of last year. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about the why. We'll kind of break it down, and I'm going to kind of review a little bit of it and then just see what questions that you guys have. So PowerPoint light, hopefully conversation large, depending on what you all have. So that's kind of my goal for today, if that seems like it works for y'all. All right, cool. So kind of just moving forward to see if my slides will work. There we go. So the big question is, so why this update? I don't know how many and how familiar you are with the old standards. What I was going to, or the old standards, what I was going to do, and Jen, because COCA-Jen, I should call. Hey, because I'm sitting here presenting, would you mind putting a link onto the chat that has the standard, of the whole standard booklet would be helpful, the updated one. That way it's a resource for everyone. But why the update is really part of it, I want to say, is big education focus. So in the past, I should say that our standards really, and they still continue to be, very focused on the medical and the psychosocial aspects of operating a pediatric oncology camp, and primarily for day camps and resident camp. And in going through and doing that, what we were hearing from members and what we were hearing from visitors is, as we were going out to camps and we were visiting, it's kind of like, well, what about the other parts of operating a camp? How do we know that those are being met? How do we know that they're either meeting state standards or camp standards? How do we know that? And we also heard from camps saying, yeah, I know we can get accredited by someone else, like the American Camp Association, like a Canadian Camp Association, those kind of things. But can COCA do that for us? And the gold ribbon folk, we really kind of decided that our wheelhouse was really the medical and psychosocial, and that it was best in the interest of the camps that we had to defer that to other camp associations. But we also heard from these camps that we have that, it's kind of like, hey, we'd really like to have help with that from COCA. So really, 1.1 is kind of a meeting of those thoughts. Once again, to try to help educate camps with regards to what does it take to operate a camp for pediatric oncology kids or families. And it's more than just the psychosocial and the medical in running an operation, but it's kind of education and guidance, I should say, more than anything else. And that really comes down to, from our point of view, it's all about the safety of our COCA camps. We want to make sure that accreditation is well represented, but we also know the safety of all of our COCA camps and our members and what they're doing is important to all of us, and especially the kids we serve. So that's really why we have it. And as I said before, COCA standards are primarily medical and psychosocial in nature. And then the other part is the operations, which is really kind of personnel, programs, facilities. And so this is so the revision really came as kind of a halfway meeting point in this. And that's why we're going to kind of discuss it. And hopefully you'll have questions and we can help guide through the success of this, just for the good of your camps and the good of your campers. And once again, result really from listening to our members. So just wanted to kind of say that's why this revision kind of took place as we kind of went through. We also realized in going through and doing this is that our past 1.1 really relied mostly on state and provincial regulations having to do with camp. And in doing some research, we found out that depending on what your state and what your province is, you can have regulations for operating an organized youth camp that are quite extensive, that are even more extensive than some accrediting bodies, all the way to some states that say, we don't have anything, you can just do what you want to. And so how do you create a bar? How do you create exactly what is safe for those as guidance for our camps, as well as our communities and our funders? So once again, this is kind of that middle ground. So one of the questions that always came up with this, I just want to address it right away, is that many of our camps And I see that we have folks that either have their own sites and some that don't, but basically say, well, you know, we're a COCA camp, we're a member camp. And when I'm talking about a COCA member camp, that is really who you are. Some of you own a facility, might operate some of the facilities. Some of you might rent, get donated a facility. It just is all over the map. And many of our member camps have said, well, you know, the camp we use is accredited, so we're fine, right? And my answer to all of that is really this, that there's camp accreditation and there's also facility accreditation. It really matters what the camp that you're working with and where they sit. And I'll use my camp as an example because I think it kind of divides us out. So I'm with Camp Ronald McDonald for Good Times, Southern California. And we actually hold 2 accreditations through the accrediting body of American Camp Association. One is for our program, which is Camp Ronald McDonald for Good Times, serves kids with cancer and their families. And then our other accreditation is for the facility that we own and operate, which we call Apple Canyon Center. So when I am going through the accreditation process as Camp Ronald McDonald for Good Times, I have to concern myself with facilities and program. When I'm Apple Canyon Center, I only concern myself with facilities because I, for instance, have Muscular Dystrophy Association. I have Crohn's and Colitis Foundation that all use our facility. They, as a matter of fact, both of those that I happen to sample are not accredited, but they require that the facilities are accredited. So what happens is all the things that we provide as a facility would be under our accreditation. The things that they provide are not accredited, and that's their own program and what they do, because we don't provide the totality of program. Sometimes we supply house, bed, a cabin. Sometimes we might do a pool program. You know, it just all depends on what they want, because that's the kind of operation I have. So it really kind of depends. And so this is kind of important to kind of understand the difference between a camp accreditation and facility accreditation. So as a COCA camp, for the use of this 1.1 accreditation, it is the COCA member camp that holds the accreditation, is one way to comply with 1.1, and we'll look at it in a minute. And so the camp, but not necessarily facility. For facility does, that's not the entire answer to this question. And so with that, it comes down to control. And this is what I always say is accreditation and all that comes down to who has direct oversight, control, and or personnel to provide whatever activity and service. So for me as Apple Canyon Center, I have control over housing, cleaning that, food service. I have control over that. So I'm accrediting. For MDA, they require that. But I don't take care of what their programs are, what their evening activities are, what their counselors are. I don't. They control that. So that's not accredited by an accredited body, and that's their choice. For a COCA camp, if you're renting a camp, if they're doing the activities, they're doing the food service, they're doing the food services, they're accredited, rock and roll. If you're doing the counselors, that's your responsibility, either by accreditation or providing documentation that you're meeting certain kinds of standards. Is that clear, or did I just confuse the heck out of all of us?
I think it's clear. Yep.
Okay, great. So let's go in. And,
go
ahead,
Brian, can I ask a question?
Please.
So our camp facility that we rent from is accredited.
Mm-hmm.
They run all of our programs, save for like the evening programs, but they're not usually like activities that require certain accreditations like the high ropes and whatever else. But we share counselors. We both, like, we use some of their counselors and we hire some of our own counselors.
And you provide your own as well. Okay, great.
So were we still like, I mean, we do all the training and we can verify that we do all the training and all that jazz, but would we have to do any more than that with this standard?
Right. So that's a great example, Jen. Thanks for bringing that up, because
no problem.
As I said, what's under control. So they have some staff and it's under their control, they're accredited, but then you're bringing in staff as well. So with this standard, as we get along a little bit, we'll take a minute. I'm going to postpone it just to kind of use this as an illustration later to answer that question. Okay.
Perfect.
Because I think it's a perfect illustration. Perfect illustration.
So
Thank you.
Brian, on the other end of the spectrum, because I know Tanya, you guys own your facility too, right? No? Okay. So as the lone facility owning camp on this
I'm
call,
on your team too. I'm
um,
on your team too. Yes.
okay, and yourself, of course. Do you use the gold ribbon accreditation as something for rental groups to say we're accredited by? I mean, is our gold ribbon accreditation through COCA going to do us any good for those outside groups that we rent to as a facility owning camp?
Yeah, and that's another great question. And
Or
I
is that
think,
not at all part of the COCA accreditation gold
well,
ribbon
COCA
now?
accreditation, if a member camp is accredited by COCA, it is definitely something that can be used to be shared, but it's also understanding to whoever you're sharing it with that it has its limitations. It has to do with the medical support and the psychosocial support
Sure.
of
But for
that.
standard 1.1, you're really looking at the camp operation program, ratio of supervision, all of that, not facility accreditation, or is there some
We're
element
not
of
really
both?
accrediting a facility,
Okay,
creating the COCA camp.
okay, that's all I
So
want to
that's
know.
really kind of what it is, the program, the COCA camp
Okay,
program. Is really
thanks.
what it is. Yeah. So let's take a look at 1.1. And I think that, as we kind of walk through, we can do this. And the way that it's written. And so once again, it asks whether or not the member, and the member is the COCA camp, has COCA membership, whether or not they offer program and facilities that meet organized camp standards. And if we can take a look at this intent, the intent really says that all aspects of the camp program and facility operations, okay, of the COCA accredited camp, that once again, they meet generally accepted camp standards. So the question is, how do we do that? But I think that's one of the things that that 1.1 is saying within this, as far as the intent, is that we want to make sure that the programs are great, but also the facilities are safe, is really what we're kind of saying. The other part is that that they're either by an accredited, body, or they're required to meet, once again, and this is what I mean, that they're required to have a generally accepted camp operation standard holding an accreditation. ACA is the one in the US, which is generally recognized. I don't think we have anybody from Canada on this call, because there's provincials as well. But ACA would be one of those that would generally accredit here in the United States. So if you have that as a COCA camp, once again, if it's your camp program and facility, if you're ACA, then basically you meet the intent of this. If you just have the facility, you meet part of it, but not all of it, because you also have the program, if you're accredited by an outside group. Now, there's an or right here, and let me go in that. Or there's evidence, and this is how we kind of met this for those camps that say, I don't want to go through ACA accreditation. It's time, it's energy, there's a lot going on in that. And there's cost. And so it's kind of like, so how can COCA do this? And we just say, well, we're not really going to do it, but what we can do is provide the education to say that instead of being accredited by ACA or an accredited body, that you provide evidence that the camp meets criteria of local operation jurisdictions, and or that you also have written descriptions of each aspect of program and facility operations. So once again, we're just saying that you have evidence that you've thought about it. And this gets to Jennifer's question. We're not accrediting those. We're just saying that the camp has actually evidence that they either meet these local things or that they have written descriptions of their program. But we're not going to necessarily judge what they are and say, do you meet certain standards for each one? Because that's really beyond our scope, because we don't keep an eye on the latest for all those across the way. So Jennifer, once again, make a dream from your point of view. It's kind of like, yeah, you'll do that for accreditation for a COCA, but it doesn't say that your facility's accredited to the rest of the world from a facility point of view. So if we get into the actual standard, you can see there's A and B. And point A right there is the member camp is accredited by recognized camp association. We just talked about it. Or then there's B, and there's a lot under B. I wanted to, and actually I think that I have, no, I'm fine. I was just kind of thinking there's another resource. I will share it with you. So just if you're still kind of sitting saying, what do we control? What don't we control? Within the body of standards, as a matter of fact, page 4 of the standards would actually share with you, there's a document in there for you to kind of go through and look at that is really talking about what does the COCA camp provide? What's provided by others? And that could be a facility. That can be if another is somebody who comes in and does a climbing program for you. Who provides others? So this is just a checklist to say, okay, so what does the COCA camp provide? What does somebody else provide? Just for you to get an idea of what you control and what you don't for when we move forward to part B here. Because if there's things that you control, then that's your policy and procedures. If it's another, it might be the facility. And the facility may not be accredited, but at least if they're responsible for that, you can go to them and ask for, what are your policies and procedures that would answer this part of this standard? And this isn't, this isn't in totality, but it's pretty comprehensive. So it's just a resource. And once again, as you look at it, if you got questions, just reach out. And I'm going back. So once again, so getting back to the standard, here's where we get into, and I will say, and I should do this, is under 1.1, or actually under the whole standards. If you notice, I think it's page 3 or 2 or 3, it actually has definitions. So when you're saying, what is a recognized camp association? They're listed. Some have said, oh, well, we're part of a corporation. They have standards. So therefore we're meeting those standards, and so therefore we're accredited by them. That's not the intent of the standard. Are they a camping? Are they really a recognized, organized camp accrediting body? And this lists what some of those are, just for reference. And I should say, through all of the standards, if you have a question about definitions, take a look at the glossary for definitions, and I'll kind of share that. So moving on, once again, to this part B, we actually put it in 2 parts. One had to do with provide written descriptions of operating procedures that describe the program of the organized and supervised activity for the following areas that apply. And we'll break this down a little bit more. And then there's another one that has to do with facility operations. So the big thing about it, and you might have control over some of this part, if I can put it, part B1 and some of part B2, that's something for you to determine. Which ones are you going to kind of pick up? And which ones can you ask the facility or the provider of that experience to provide you with that documentation?
Can I ask a question? And I think I know the answer, but so based on what you just said, we rent our facility. Mm-hmm. There are definitely things in point B2 that our facility covers.
Yep.
And they are ACA accredited. Uh-huh. But I will need to get from them documentation to answer or prove these things, right? Or I can't just say they're ACA accredited, so I don't have to provide any additional evidence.
No, you can just say, hey, they're ACA accredited and they are responsible for these items.
Okay.
So it's camp XYZ is taking care of these items. My host camp, we're responsible for these items.
Okay. Thank you.
And that, so therefore their accreditation and proof of that, can save you having to do some of that for sure. One of the things that we have done also, just to support those of you, and as we get down and we dig through these, it just be something so you can look at, is there's also a resource guide. So at the end of standard 1.1, there's an appendix. And that appendix basically lists everything under A and B and saying, so what questions should we ask for, or what kind of documentation of a procedure or practice should we be looking for to provide in order to accomplish that? Okay. So that's just, once again, at the end of standard 1.1, that appendix. So let's take a look at 1.1B. And once again, this has to do primarily with program focused kind of issues. And I should say that these lists were not just kind of come out of my head or Jennifer's head, but we did take a look at what were accrediting bodies looking for and what was pretty standard with regards to that and with regards to those regulatory bodies. So if it was a county health department, if it was a state, that kind of, what were the things that they were looking for? And what was the common threads through all of them? And we just came up with those based on what most common across the way. Even though your state may not have that regulation, most states or many states would. And so we just put that in as a best practice. So that's how we kind of determine what's there. So in this one, once again, it takes a look at staffing procedures. And Jen, what you want to do, this is where I wanted to have that conversation, because there's staffing procedures and there's supervision, verification, qualifications of supervisors, those kind of things. So you are using an accredited camp. Many of their staff are under their accreditation to be fine, but the ones that you control, the question would be, what's the screening? What's the training? What is the skill verification? What's the ratios that you're going to want for those that you supervise? And to have, once again, we're not telling you what it should be. We're just asking you, what is it, and do you practice it in these different areas? That's also with regards to supervision qualifications, verification, and training. That includes the director, that might be you. But what kinds of training, interviews, background checks that you've done, what has that been done for those that you control? Also in this, it has to do with program inventory, control, maintenance, and safety. If you're running archery, how do you know the arrows are good? You bring them up every year. Who knows? If you bring, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of what those different things might be. But are they regularly controlled? In other words, controlled for unauthorized access? Are they maintained? Are they taken a look at? How often are they? It could be every season. You just check them out and say they're good. And you're doing 1 week, or maybe you do it every week if you do multiple weeks. That's up to you. But it just says, what is that kind of program equipment, inventory, control, maintenance, and safety? It also asks, what are the safety procedures? So if, safety procedures can be everything from orientation. It can be of campers, of staff that are using that area. What are the things that you bring up to as a risk management technique, just to make sure that something doesn't happen? Hey, we're keeping everybody in this area. Please don't go outside of this if we have it. Or it could be also that we have a ratio of what the staff is per kids, just to make sure. There can be all kinds of things. And like I said, this is where that addendum can be really helpful to ask some of those questions. The other one's emergency procedures. If something was to happen, what are the steps that whoever's running that, and that could be the camp that is supplying the activity counselor, or it can be your own staff, but do they know those procedures? What are the procedures? What do they do if someone gets hurt? And gosh only knows with our kiddos, if it's a kid on therapy and there's some kind of incident or accident, your standard camp that might be accredited may not know of oncology specific procedures that you may have in order to ensure the safety of those folks. So this is just saying, what are the things that you can control? If the camp has emergency procedures, you reviewed those and accepted those, that's fine. But at least you're going in saying, okay, I'm going in with full knowledge that that's something that's important for us to look at. No. Transportation's another one of those, and this goes with buses, vans, golf carts, all that stuff. Is, what kinds of inspections, soundness, driver verification, training is done for each one of those. And if you are controlling a golf cart, then it's under your control. It's not, if the camp says, hey, here's keys to 6 golf carts, they're yours. Great, but how do you know that the people that you have that are controlling those, driving those, do you just let 14-year-olds drive? Do you have, 17 people that can be on a golf cart at once? Is that taking it into the lake is okay? What are those specific, training that you're doing with those that are going to be operating those, just to make sure that it's safe? And that also goes with buses and vans if you're controlling that.
Right.
Yes.
What is a typical, so we use for student buses that we rent to transport to offsite things.
Yep.
What would a typical documentation from them look like? Like, what would I be asking them for?
Yeah, really great question. And I don't know if it's a document. Well, it could be one of two things. It could be a
Okay.
document from them, or it can be a document that you provide them that say, hey, so here's the population that we have. Here's what you're providing us. And then it might be, you know, how do they certify their drivers? Do their drivers get background checks? What maintenance checks do they do on their vehicles to make sure it's not going to break down? Those kind of things. What kind of supervision do you provide on those buses? And if you don't, what are you asking them to do? What kind of first aid kits, what kind of those kind of things that you might want to have on a bus, depending on how far that distance is and
Okay.
coming back. Because even though they're working for you, I want to make sure that, yeah, that driver's been certified. Do they have a background check that's going to be around a lot of kids and something inappropriate doesn't happen? Even if there is supervision, what kind of emergency procedures do they have? Should there be a breakdown? Should they be those kind of things? As well as if I have staff on that bus, what kind of responsibilities do I ask them to do as a leader on that bus? Should there be a breakdown? Should there be an emergency? XYZ.
Thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yes, I have never asked for like that sort of documentation, so I'm just wondering if the corporate office, I'm hoping that they have some sort of standardized something that they can,
And my guess, being student first, they do.
okay,
Just because I don't, matter of fact, if you want to, you know, email me after this, my email will be at the end, let me know, and I'll show you the actual request for proposal I send a bus company
oh, okay,
that says, hey, here's what we got, here's what we're doing, these are the things that you'll provide, blah, 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 blah.
that'd be great, thank you.
Because I understand I went through the same head scratch myself. So then we get down to what I'll call B2, which is more site and facility related. And these once again have to do with what's out there. And if you are renting a facility or getting a facility donated, you can definitely ask those, or it might take a little work, it just depends. But you know, one of the things that we find out is the amounts of safe drinking water, and the providing adequate amounts is very subjective. But is it where you have to ship it in? Does it come from, we just put a hose in the lake or a pipe in the lake and that's okay? Is it certified safe to drink? How does that work? Many municipalities will regulate that. And because I know, but it used to be the camps could just literally have a spring box, and whatever water came to the ground, then it got funneled off and it was put in a big tank, and that's what everybody drank. And that's where we got E. coli issues and all other kinds of things. So what is that procedure either your facility has? And if you have a donated facility, that's fine, but also what do they do? If it's municipal, hey, it's a municipal water company. Great. Adequate hand washing, toileting, and showering facilities. Now, what's adequate, once again, is a choice of yours, but where do you want those? Do they have enough? I know in the state of California, you have to have a certain amount of hand washing stations and it's also in accordance to how many toileting facilities you have. And then how many of those you have according to how many you're serving. So you can see it whether or not if there's something that's within your jurisdiction. But that can be helpful as well, just to make sure that there's enough. Food service meeting local health department regulations. I think this day and age, most of our municipalities have some kind of community health that take a look at food safety with regards to storage, preparation, and cleanliness. And if so, does it meet those? I know some people, it's kind of like, well, we cook for them. It's kind of like, great. But what are and that's totally fine, because we have volunteers do that as well. But in the state of California, they have to be certified by taking a test through the health department. Or if you have food brought in, that's great, but where they prepare it, are they regulated by health departments and those kind of things to make sure? And is it kept at the right temperatures and all those kind of things for your kids? Adequate trash removal, and there's also appropriate vector control. And by the way, vectors kind of like those little rodents and those things none of us like. They call those vector in the appropriate world. But adequate trash removal, what is that? I don't know, but what's the routine? Is there a routine? Or does it just accumulate? Because that can bring rodents, it can bring, insects, it can bring that kind of a thing. So what is determined appropriate? And also, depending on the parts of your country where you are, whether or not mosquitoes are an issue, ticks are an issue, what are some of the appropriate plans that you have to respond to that? Is it that they get, that you provide insect repellents? Is it that you have someone come through and spray every once in a while? I don't know, but that's just up to you and what you consider is appropriate. And what I can say is, according to all these, we're not telling you what's appropriate. We're just saying, have you thought about this? What's appropriate for you? And that's good. But our responsibility is we're bringing it up to you to think about, to answer. And therefore, you can't just say, well, gosh, I never thought about that. That's really what this education process is here. Swimming pool facilities, I know that at least, I think it's now federal, but there was any pool that is not a privately owned pool, and I think even privately owned pools have to meet now. There's a Virginia Baker Safety Act, which Virginia Baker was unfortunately the daughter of an individual who was swimming and got held down in the pool because of the suction for circulating the water, got stuck there and actually drowned. So there's been revisions, this has probably been in the last 5 years, 7 years, where they have where you can't get sucked down into that and held down, but it's actually equipment so they can be released. But do they meet whatever standards are that for cleanliness and for operation? And then the last one we had was safety plan for use of a lake, a stream, a river, and ocean. That basically is there an outlined area? Is it inspected ahead of time so you don't have kids diving in on a rock pile or on an underwater, spear, I was going to say, but a log or something like that could be dangerous for them. Where currents are, where boating might be, public boating might be. How do you determine that? What is your safety plan to make sure that if kids use that it's okay? And in rivers and streams, also with regards to currents and those kind of things, what's your plan? So we've identified these. So I'm going to take a deep breath and say questions. What questions might you have? Thoughts that you have, reactions that you have.
I mean, this is totally an internal thing in my head is, so we love our rental facility. However, we don't really love the people who operate it because they're not very quick about responding to things. So just my internal monologue is,
how do I get this done?
Yeah, I have to rely on them to do a whole bunch of stuff that, I mean, it took them 2 weeks to reply to an email that was like, there was nothing that they had to do other than reply. So,
yeah.
But,
and we can definitely understand your pain and your challenge with that. One of the things to think about, and I just, in my experience, is just because I know being someone that rents a facility has it as well, is when we renew contracts, they write it into the contract. Hey, we're going through accreditation. Under accreditation for children's oncology camps, there are these certain things that we need to ask about. Do you meet these standards and everything else? And so we need to have documentation, and it can be, a one-page response to each one of those, or they can say, no, we don't want to rent to you, which is a whole nother issue.
I don't want to go there, Brian.
I completely understand. But I will say that for many, I mean, this isn't, I guess the part that I would just say is in premise to that is, hey, our responsibility is to operate the safest experience and the most joyful experience to these kids that we serve. And to that end, we're asking you to partner with us with regards to safety. And so with accreditation, we have these questions to ask you, and if you can respond. Or, and my deposit check will be dependent on when you
like that one.
Because they always like money. Where's your deposit check? Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, no, I can understand. Sometimes it is like, hey, what does that need to be? The thing about this, like I said, is we're not determining what needs to happen. It's basically giving you the information so that you can say that's okay with us, or hey, we would like to do something in addition to that. And that's a whole nother negotiation. Other questions? Concerns? Fears? Wow, you guys are easy. I was going to, and since we're here, I will maybe take that a minute and just walk through and say, do I have this? And Jennifer, I was going to get up the appendix. I should have thought about this before, but I didn't. And I should say, maybe I could share this too, this is a walk through, is that if you haven't, so if you haven't, but this is the COCA website. Yes, it is Jennifer's lovely picture right there on the front as our new ED. Yay. But just to kind of navigate is you'll notice that right over here, there's a gold ribbon accreditation program, little link there. And if you go to that, under this, it actually under policies and standards, it will give you the COCA standards, and it'll also give you what we call a policy library. So for actually any of the COCA standards, this gives you examples that other camps have done that you can review and take a look at as you consider as you write your own. But that's here as well, just so you know. There's also the 2022 accreditation calendars right there as well. But I was just going to go to the standards. It comes up as a PDF, but this might just give me, if you can not get sick from my scrolling. And I think it's on here, isn't it? Oh, it's at the end.
Yeah, I think I discovered it was
Because it's an
actually at the very
appendix.
end.
Because it's an appendix. So you can see here with this appendix, it actually brings up each one of those points under BA or B1 and B2. And it gives you some examples that you should consider in developing whether or not that's a response to that. Or if you even want to share these with who your facility is doing. And I'll just take a look at this and say, so if it's the adequate drinking water, and hopefully you can all see this, it's large enough, but it's once again, it's the local municipality, if water is provided by them, if it's a private water source, is it tested for appropriate human consumption? Appropriate sleeping accommodations. This gives you some examples from different health departments across the way of what they might be. Not saying that you have to do that, but once again, what do you have and what do you want? The other one was, yeah, even from the safe plan for use of the pool lake, does the camp have a program that offers aquatics using these, either a lake or a stream or a river? Describes the camp need for examining the aquatic area for the elimination or access control to potential hazards. Written rules for using of the area of equipment would work. Describing access control of its docks, that kind of a thing. Also watercraft, if you're using watercraft like sailboats or canoes, what instruction is provided, how are they secured so they can't be, so a kid just can't go down there and hop in one and off they go across the lake. So it just gives you some examples with regards to that. Hopefully this will be helpful. We just didn't want to leave you out there. Any others? Cool. Well,
I guess just a question related to the review process. So the visitor goes in and kind of reviews the documentation that we have provided. I know kind of the last iteration that we were doing, we ran into some inconsistency, I guess, between how some people were marking a standard or, requiring the standard meets the documentation, but how have we addressed that? Is there like a standard that they're looking for? If we don't meet a standard, they come back to us and say we need a little bit more, or kind of what happens?
Yeah, and Jennifer, you can jump in on this, but let me get a stab. And I will say that with our accreditation program, we do use volunteers as visitors. So once again, they're either camp professionals and they're medical professionals. We try to let them know to take off their own glasses and to put on standards glasses with regards to taking a look at standards. Does what the camp provide meet the standard? Not necessarily what they want, but does it meet the standard? And that's what it is. If there is a disagreement with regards to that, or if they feel like they need more and you answer that, what I would say is have that dialogue, but also reach out to us.
Okay.
Because humans are humans. And sometimes that happens. And I've been doing accreditation for a long time. And to some people's chagrin, but to others' joy, is I'm usually put on the ones in which there's been bumps along the road at others, because I just look at the standard and that's what it is. And then there's a conversation of, have you thought about, after that, it's an educational kind of arm, or maybe you should ask about this compared to what they have, because I've learned how to phrase it that way instead of saying, well, I think you really ought to do this. It's like, I get it, but the standard says this. So that's a little bit of education even on visitors. But I would say that if there's some real bumps along the road, that's why we like to have the documentation ahead of time, have that conversation ahead of time, and go down and do the way. And even to the point when it's on the visit there, we are asking our visitors just to observe that there are certain things that are on a list that are actually in practice. That what they say they're doing. Not that they're doing what you think they ought to do, but they're doing what they say they're going to do. That is really acceptable, as long as it meets the standard.
Thank you.
And Jennifer, I don't know if you had anything. Jennifer from COCA, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Nope.
I have one quick question about the portal. I know that you guys worked hard to make sure that the documentation we've uploaded into the portal is still there, and we can, see that, and we can see those conversations or comments by the reviewers, who looked at
And the
that stuff.
responses
And
from the camp, right?
exactly. So will visitors this go around also have access to and see those conversations between the last reviewers and the camp? Or is that really just the camp being able to see that?
That's a good question. I will check on that for you, Jennifer. I know in our rule of safety, we were like, don't delete anything yet until we know exactly what we're gonna need. We
I'm
definitely.
just curious if there's going to be sort of two sets of comments,
Mhm,
previous,
yeah.
and will new visitors, if they're different people,
Right.
be
And
taking the
it-
comments of other visitors into account, and we have twice as much to kind of address and try to.
Mhm.
And I think the one thing to know is that we realize as COCA is that we went through and we did a whole bunch of document review with all kinds of good hopes in 2020. And we knew that we actually just said, should we even do document review? But we know a lot of people put a lot of effort into that. So we wanted to respond to that, at least get it reviewed, have visitor feedback to that, to go through and do that, and that would then come forward. Know that going in now to 2022, for those camps that have gone through that process in 2020, is that information, the intent is for it to be there. We know that those people that reviewed it may not be your visitors. It just kind of depends on that. But we do ask those that review documents and those that are visiting to have conversations.
Mhm.
So in other words, it's not like a whole nother set of eyes, that they will be actually taking a look at what was accepted in 2020. But it also is, we're asking that there be responsibility taken by the camp to say, if anything's changed since 2020 now to 2022, that you have to resubmit that and we have to relook at that again. So for instance, 1.1 would be one of those situations. We're not going into the old 1.1, it's now the new one. So that will have to be relooked at it. But 5.2 is going to be the same. And as long as you don't have any operational changes, then we should be good to go.
Yeah, it was just more about the comments that were made or specific recommendations that we were trying to address before. If we have different visitors this time and they have a different take on it or are interpreting the standard differently, as you mentioned.
And as you run through that experience, if you're experiencing some of those, please reach out to me or Jennifer.
Okay,
Because we don't want this to be laborious. We don't want it to be, but we know we're dealing with humans and it's just kind of like, let's bring it, but we are asking those visitors that are going for 2022 to review all that information of what was submitted before and what was accepted, that kind of a thing, and take it from there forward.
okay,
If they have questions about that, they're also supposed to reach out to us and we'll take a look at the past reviewers and give some background. So we're trying to do that behind the scenes so it doesn't impact you, but best laid plans.
sure. It's a complex process, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah.
We appreciate all of your work on all this for year after year.
Well, you know, to be honest with you, it's all the work that you guys do in your camps that's the important stuff. And that's what we really want to try to do, is to support that in every way we can. Others? All right. Then the one last slide that I have, and by the way, I should say, we're going to send you a copy of the recording. We're going to send you a copy of this presentation deck, just so that you have it as well. But the one last that I just did want to share, and I think, oh yeah, let me go back to that one. And that would just be this. Is there's contact information. Like I said, you don't have to put this down right now. It'll be coming out to you in the deck. But as you go through your process, if you have one of those, oh, look at this, I didn't know to ask that question, or I didn't want to ask that question, but now I do. Here's our emails. Reach out. Even if you need reinterpretation on this, I mean, that's no problem at all. We can go through and do that, or take it, because it's great having specifics and to take that into account. All right. So, ta-da. That's us. So how y'all guys doing in January of a new year? Guys doing okay?